tragic criminal case has left the community shocked and grieving. What should have been the happiest time in a couple's life, the beginning of their marriage, ended in sudden violence and death. This is the heartbreaking story of Sierra, a 27-year-old transgender woman whose dream of love and a new life was cut short just one day after her wedding. Sierra, originally from San Antonio, had spent most of her adult life openly living as a transgender woman. Those who knew her described her as warm, bubbly, and always willing to help others. She worked as a makeup artist at a local salon and had built a loyal base of clients who admired not just her talent, but also her courage to live authentically in a society that often judged people like her. Sierra dreamed of having a partner who would love her for who she was. After years of waiting, she thought she had finally found that in 30-year-old Brandon. Brandon, a construction worker from the same area, met Sierra through mutual friends. According to those close to the couple, their relationship started casually but grew more serious over the course of a year. Sierra rarely talked about her past in detail, and Brandon never pushed her for answers. Some say he knew, others say he didn't. But what everyone agrees on is that Sierra truly believed Brandon accepted her and loved her. When he proposed, she was overjoyed. Their wedding was small and intimate, held at a rented venue just outside of town. Photos posted online showed Sierra in a soft ivory dress, smiling with pride and happiness. Brandon stood beside her, looking calm but reserved. Some guests felt something was off about his demeanor, but no one suspected what would happen next. The couple moved into a modest apartment the day after their wedding, ready to start their new life. But within 24 hours, tragedy struck. According to neighbors, loud shouting was heard from the apartment around midnight. Moments later, there were sounds of glass breaking and screams for help. When police arrived, Sierra was found severely injured. She was rushed to the hospital, but pronounced dead shortly after. Brandon had fled the scene and became the main suspect in what would soon be classified as a homicide. The case quickly gained attention across the state, sparking conversations about the dangers faced by transgender individuals, especially in romantic relationships where identity and trust are sensitive issues. Some questioned whether Brandon felt deceived or whether he was acting out of hatred and fear. Was this a crime of passion, or was it premeditated violence? As the investigation began to uncover more details, many were left wondering, did Sierra hide the truth, or did Brandon simply refuse to accept it? Regardless of the answer, one thing was clear. Sierra's death was a painful reminder of how fragile acceptance can be, and how dangerous ignorance and rage can become. The day after the wedding, the apartment complex where Sierra and Brandon had just moved in was quiet. Like most early Sunday mornings in suburban Houston, neighbors had seen the couple carrying boxes into their new home just the evening before, smiling and holding hands. Nothing seemed out of place. For Sierra, it was a dream finally coming true, married, settled, and ready to build a future. But everything changed just after midnight. A neighbor, Maria Gonzalez, who lived in the unit below, reported hearing raised voices around 12:45 a.m. At first, she didn't think much of it. I thought maybe they were just having an argument, newlyweds adjusting to living together, she told local reporters. But within minutes, the shouting escalated into what she described as pure rage. There was screaming, things being thrown, then a loud crash, like glass breaking, and then silence. But not the calm kind, an eerie kind of silence, Maria recalled. Alarmed, she knocked on their door but got no response. She considered calling the police but hesitated, unsure if it was serious. That hesitation would haunt her. Across the hall, another neighbor, Jamal Reed, said he heard a woman crying and pleading, "Please don't do this. I didn't lie to you, I loved you." The words stayed in his mind long after the police arrived. Just after 1 a.m., a call finally came into 911, but it wasn't from the neighbors. It was from Brandon himself. His voice was cold, almost detached, according to the dispatcher. He simply said, "I need an ambulance. My wife is hurt. She lied to me." Then the call ended. When first responders arrived at the scene, they found Sierra lying on the floor in the living room, unconscious and covered in bruises. A shattered vase lay beside her, and there was blood on the corner of a coffee table. Paramedics attempted CPR, But Sierra had already suffered severe head trauma. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where she was pronounced dead on arrival. Brandon was nowhere to be found. The front door was left slightly ajar, and his phone was still inside the apartment. Police believe he fled on foot. A manhunt began within hours, with officers canvassing the area and checking local bus and train stations. Back at the crime scene, officers began collecting evidence, including a torn piece of a wedding photo and a handwritten note found in the trash. The note appeared to Huizu. Before the wedding, Sierra had written a letter, a raw and vulnerable note, confessing her nervousness about telling Brandon the full truth. She clung to the hope that love would overcome everything by sunrise. But by sunrise, the apartment complex was sealed off with yellow crime scene tape, and media trucks had begun to line the street. What had once been private, the dreams, the promises, the whispered secrets, had now erupted into a public tragedy. And for those who had known Sierra, one haunting question echoed louder than any scream. How did something that began in love end in such brutal silence? Inside apartment 3B, the living room that had just yesterday been filled with unopened wedding gifts and bursts of laughter was now a crime scene soaked in tragedy. According to police reports and the initial forensic analysis, the attack on Sierra was not a quick, impulsive burst of rage. It was a prolonged, violent confrontation, a battle that escalated past any point of control. Investigators pieced together the timeline of events through surveillance footage, neighbor testimonies, and the harrowing details of the scene itself. Around 11:45 p.m., the couple had returned from a small dinner at a local diner. Nothing unusual was noticed by the cashier, who later recalled that they seemed quiet, but not upset. Sierra was still wearing her wedding ring. Brandon paid in cash, gave a faint, almost distracted smile, and opened the door for her as they left. But inside their apartment, something changed. Investigators believe the fight started shortly after they arrived home. A search of Sierra's phone revealed a chilling half-written message to a close friend, time-stamped at 12:06 a.m. He found out. He's angry. I'm scared. The message was never sent. Police believe that the confrontation likely began when Brandon discovered documents confirming Sierra's legal gender change and medical history, tucked away in a locked drawer. Documents Sierra had wrestled with how and when to share, and perhaps never got the chance to explain in her own words. The argument grew louder. Signs of struggle were evident in multiple rooms: overturned furniture, broken picture frames, and desperate attempts to defend herself. A shattered lamp lay in the hallway, and blood spatter patterns suggested Sierra had been struck multiple times before collapsing near the living room couch. The autopsy later confirmed Sierra had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with the use of a heavy object, likely the ceramic vase officers found near her body. There were also additional bruises and signs of older, healing injuries. It remains unclear whether Brandon had been abusive before, or if this was the first and only explosion of violence. What makes the tragedy even more haunting is the raw desperation in Sierra's final moments. Forensics revealed she had managed to crawl several feet toward the door before losing consciousness. Her fingernails were broken and bloodied, evidence she may have been trying to unlock the front door or reach her phone. A torn wedding photo was found near the kitchen garbage bin, symbolic and chilling. Brandon's face had been scratched out, while Sierra's half remained. On the counter, a glass of red wine sat untouched, a silent witness to everything that had gone wrong. Brandon's disappearance added another layer to the horror. His wallet, car keys, and ID were missing, suggesting he had planned to flee. But his phone was left behind, hastily wiped of all recent messages. Even so, investigators managed to retrieve fragments from backups, revealing a few heated texts between Brandon and a cousin, written just hours before the wedding. Texts that expressed doubts about Sierra and hinted at ugly rumors he had heard. As the community mourned and Sierra's friends struggled to make sense of the nightmare, the case quickly gained national attention. Advocates for LGBTQ+ rights held candlelight vigils, demanding justice and awareness. The Houston Police Department launched a statewide manhunt for Brandon. One day after saying "I do," Sierra was gone. Her life was taken, not just by the hands of a man she loved, but by a society that had taught him her identity, was something to fear, something to hate. The morning after the crime, the Houston Police Department wasted no time. Detectives from the homicide unit arrived at the apartment complex before sunrise, working alongside forensic teams to meticulously document and preserve the scene. Yellow crime scene tape sealed off the area. Officers canvassed the building, knocking on doors, interviewing neighbors, and collecting surveillance footage from nearby buildings and traffic cameras. Detective Angela Ramirez, a seasoned investigator known for her calm and methodical approach, was assigned to lead the case. The moment she stepped into the apartment, she sensed that this wasn't just a simple domestic violence case. There was something deeply personal about the violence, something emotional. Betrayal mixed with rage. In a press statement later, Ramirez would say, "You could feel the tension in every broken frame, every overturned chair. This wasn't just an argument gone wrong. This was heartbreak turned deadly." The first major breakthrough came from Sierra's phone. Although Brandon had tried to delete recent messages, tech forensics were able to recover much of the data. The unfinished text to Sierra's friend sent a chill down the spine of the entire team. "He found out. He's angry. I'm scared." That one sentence shifted the narrative completely. It wasn't just about violence anymore. It was about fear, identity, and possibly premeditation. Police also found a journal tucked away under Sierra's bed. Inside were several handwritten entries, raw and painful, where she expressed her anxiety about telling the truth to Brandon, her fear of losing him if he ever found out. One entry, dated 2 months before the wedding, read, "I think he suspects something, but I don't know how to say it. I love him too much to lose him." The forensic team confirmed Sierra had suffered multiple cancer. There were blows to the head, and there were clear signs of attempted self-defense, scratches on her arms and bruises on her hands. Toxicology reports showed no signs of drugs or alcohol in her system. This wasn't an accident. It was a targeted, violent attack. Detectives also began digging into Brandon's background. On the surface, he had no prior criminal record, but his online activity revealed a far more troubling side. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Brandon had been visiting several internet forums that discussed transgender relationships, some of them hostile and filled with hateful rhetoric. There were even anonymous posts, believed to have been written by him, asking unsettling questions like, "What would you do if your partner wasn't who they said they were?" Security footage showed Brandon leaving the apartment on foot at 10:08 a.m., wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack. He was seen walking toward a nearby gas station, then vanished from the camera's view. Police believe he boarded a Greyhound bus shortly afterward, based on a ticket purchased under a fake name and a witness report from a driver who claimed the man was sweating and shaking. A statewide alert was issued, and Brandon's face quickly appeared on news stations and social media feeds. Tips started pouring in, including a possible sighting in Dallas, but none could be confirmed. As the search widened, Sierra's friends held a candlelight vigil outside her salon. Her favorite songs played softly in the background as people laid flowers, held signs reading "Justice for Sierra," and lit candles that flickered against the growing darkness. Detective Ramirez stood silently in the crowd that night, watching the pain ripple through the community. She knew they were not just chasing a killer. They were uncovering a deeper wound in society, and she was determined to make sure Sierra's voice would not be lost in the silence. As the investigation continued, more disturbing details about the relationship between Sierra and Brandon began to surface, details that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. What had first appeared to be a sudden act of violence to look more like a calculated outburst, built on denial, manipulation, and suppressed rage. A turning point came when detectives finally got in touch with one of Brandon's ex-girlfriends, Melissa D., who agreed to speak confidentially. She revealed that Brandon had a history of emotional instability, especially when it came to his masculinity and public image. He always had this obsession with being seen as a real man, she said. He hated being laughed at or even slightly embarrassed. Melissa then shared something even more revealing. Months before meeting Sierra, Brandon had confided in her that he had once unknowingly dated a transgender woman during his time working out of state. He claimed he was humiliated when he found out and swore he would never be fooled again. That revelation shifted the entire perspective of the case. Perhaps Brandon's rage wasn't just triggered by discovery. It was fueled by a deep, pre-existing resentment. The digital forensics team uncovered even more evidence from Brandon's laptop, recovered later from his brother's house during a search. In a hidden folder, they found voice memos, rambling recordings where Brandon talked to himself, sometimes in anger, sometimes in fear. In one recording dated 3 days before the wedding, Brandon whispered, "If this is true, if what people are saying is real, I don't know what I'll do. I'll lose everything. People will think I'm a joke." In another, recorded just hours before the wedding, his tone turned colder. "If she lied to me, I swear to God, I won't let her ruin my life." But the most shocking piece of evidence came from a conversation thread between Brandon and his cousin Marcus, who lived in Austin. In their chat, Brandon had sent Marcus a blurry screenshot of a post from an anonymous online forum, an old comment that seemed to suggest Sierra's transgender identity. The thread itself was filled with hateful speech, with users encouraging others to expose the truth and take back their dignity. Marcus had replied, "Damn, you sure? You better not let her play you, bro." From that point on, Brandon's messages became darker. At one point, he even joked, "Maybe I'll make the news." Groom goes viral for flipping out. Investigators believe Brandon had been building resentment and fear in the days leading up to the wedding, creating a psychological powder keg that finally exploded. Detective Ramirez later stated in a press briefing, "We believe Brandon knew, or at least strongly suspected, Sierra's identity before the wedding. This wasn't about betrayal in the moment. This was about perception, ego, and fear of being judged." What made it all the more heartbreaking was Sierra's own lack of malice. From her journal entries, voice messages to friends, and her overall behavior, it became clear. She truly loved Brandon and believed that their relationship could survive honesty. She had been preparing to tell him everything after the wedding, hoping he would understand. Instead, her vulnerability was met with violence, and the truth, once hidden, was now laid bare. Not just about what happened that night, but about the quiet, simmering hatred that cost a woman her life. Suspicious? The manager Googled recent wanted criminals and instantly recognized Brandon's face from a news article. After nearly a week on the run, Brandon was finally caught, bringing a tense chapter in the investigation to its climax. The breakthrough came from a tip called in by a motel manager in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A hotel manager in Louisiana reported a man matching Brandon's description had checked in under the name Kyle Morris, paying in cash and avoiding eye contact. The man stayed in his room, left only late at night, and had specifically requested that no cleaning staff enter. Houston detectives coordinated with local law enforcement in Louisiana, and on the 7th night after Sierra's death, a SWAT team quietly surrounded the small, dimly lit motel. At 3:15 a.m., officers knocked once. When there was no answer, they breached the door. Inside, they found Brandon lying fully clothed on the bed with a small duffel bag at his feet. Inside the bag were clothes, snacks, and over $2,000 in cash, likely taken from a hidden stash at his brother's house. Brandon didn't resist arrest. He simply said, "I knew you'd find me," and put his hands behind his head. He was taken into custody without incident and transported back to Houston under heavy security. Back in Texas, the arrest made headlines across the country. Public reaction was divided. Some viewed Brandon as a man pushed too far by perceived deception, while others, especially LGBTQ+ advocates and Sierra's friends, saw the arrest as long overdue justice. At the press conference following his capture, Detective Ramirez addressed the media directly. This was not a crime of heat or confusion. This was an act of violence rooted in fear, pride, and prejudice. Sierra did not die because she lied. She died because someone decided her truth made her unworthy of love or life. In the hours after his arrest, Brandon remained largely silent, speaking only during the formal booking process. But once in the interrogation room, he broke down. With his head in his hands, he whispered, "I thought I could live with it. I thought I could ignore it. But after the wedding, it just hit me. Everyone was watching. What would they say if they found out?" I panicked. He didn't deny the killing. In fact, he admitted to everything: how he found the documents, how he confronted Sierra, and how the argument turned violent. He claimed he didn't mean to kill her, but that his anger took over. Detectives didn't believe it was an accident. The evidence showed otherwise. The bruises, the voice messages, the journal entries, all pointed to a growing tension Brandon never addressed in a healthy way. Brandon was formally charged with second-degree murder and fleeing the scene of a crime. His bail was denied. At the courthouse, Sierra's mother wept as the charges were read. In her hand, she clutched the last photo Sierra ever posted, a selfie with Brandon, both smiling, captioned "A New Beginning." For Sierra, that beginning ended in tragedy. But with Brandon in custody, the long road toward justice had finally begun. The trial of Brandon began 6 months after his arrest, drawing widespread attention, not only for the brutality of the crime, but also for the conversation it sparked about identity, acceptance, and how society views transgender individuals. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Sierra's family and friends filled one side, many wearing pins with her name and a purple ribbon, her favorite color. On the other side, a smaller group of Brandon's family sat quietly, some avoiding eye contact with the press. Brandon appeared pale and thinner than before, dressed in a standard prison uniform. He showed little emotion during the opening statements, even as prosecutors described the night he violently took the life of the woman who loved him, simply because she was not the person he expected her to be. The prosecution leaned heavily on the evidence. Sierra's unfinished text message, the voice memos found on Brandon's laptop, his online search history, and recordings of his conversations with his cousin. They painted a clear picture of a man who had discovered the truth days before the wedding and chose not to walk away, but instead to marry Sierra and kill her when his shame and anger overcame him. Brandon's defense team attempted a different angle. They argued that Brandon experienced temporary psychological trauma, claiming he was emotionally manipulated and reacted in a state of shock. They tried to frame Sierra's decision not to disclose her full history before the wedding as a form of betrayal. But the jury was not convinced. Witness after witness spoke about Sierra's kindness, her fear of rejection, and her sincere love for Brandon. Her best friend recounted how Sierra had rehearsed what she wanted to say to Brandon for weeks, but kept backing out because she was afraid of losing him. A therapist who had seen Sierra briefly before the wedding testified that Sierra had deep anxiety about her identity being misunderstood or weaponized. After a 2-week trial, the jury deliberated for less than a day. Brandon was found guilty of second-degree murder with an added charge of fleeing justice. At sentencing, the judge spoke directly to Brandon. "You had a choice. You could have walked away. You could have asked questions. But you chose violence. You let your pride matter more than her life." Brandon was sentenced to 35 years in prison, with no chance of parole for the first 25. Outside the courthouse, Sierra's mother stood before a crowd of reporters and supporters. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "My daughter was brave, beautiful, and honest. She didn't deserve this. No one does." The case sparked national conversations. Vigils were held in cities across the U.S. LGBTQ+ organizations pushed for stronger hate crime protections and better education around transgender identities. Social media erupted with both mourning and calls for justice, not just for Sierra, but for the many transgender lives lost to violence and silence. For Sierra's community, the trial's outcome brought some closure, but the loss remained deep. Her empty salon chair, her favorite lipstick left in a drawer, her laughter now only an echo in the hearts of those who loved her. Justice had come, but far too late to save the life that should have never been in danger. Sierra Monroe's story is one of love, silence, fear, and ultimately violence.